Now, the whole idea of speedrunning is something that always seemed cool to me, however I'd never actually tried it, and it's not until recently I thought, well, why not just have a go and make a video on it? So I have, and this is how it went. So before you can speedrun a game, you need, surprise surprise, a game, and from the title of this video I imagine you can see what I went with. And while this may seem like a difficult choice for a first ever speedrun, it's a game I know pretty well, meaning I could just negate the learning part of this run by about 90%. Oh, and if you're wondering why I chose Dark Souls 1, well, it's actually for a very interesting reason. Because it's the easiest. And I know there's going to be people out there saying, well, that's not true, but for me personally, Dark Souls 1 is by far the most manageable, especially when combined with game-breaking glitches. Anyway, with the game chosen, I next had to choose the route. Now me, being the Dark Souls veteran I am, knew pretty much exactly what route I was going to take. Now I'm just joking. I had fuck all idea how to speedrun this game, which obviously meant just googling how to speedrun Dark Souls and choosing the first result. Which, if you're curious, just so happened to be Democracy's Black Knight Halberd tutorial, so all credit to him for how I learned how to do this. Now, the goal I set for this was pretty simple. Get a run that was as fast as possible, obviously. However, to make it a bit more interesting, I decided it had to be a run I could submit to speedrun.com. And if you're wondering why that's part of the criteria, it's because the Black Knight Halberd isn't a guaranteed drop, meaning I occasionally had to cheat it in, so while those runs are very good for practice for obvious reasons, you can't upload them. Meaning if I wanted to get my name on speedrun.com, the Halberd would have to drop naturally. And with all that out of the way, let's get into the actual run. So a central part of the Black Knight Halberd run is, surprise surprise, the Black Knight Halberd, which makes getting it the first key objective. Although, before you can do any of that, you first need to escape the Undead Asylum, something which isn't very difficult at all. Unsurprisingly, this area is an absolute breeze, especially since the Asylum Demon is even less of a threat when you use black firebombs. Ironically, the boulder that rolls down the stairs before you meet Oscar caused me more trouble than an actual demon, something that I didn't realise at the time would almost perfectly sum up the overarching theme of this entire speedrun. After this, it's off to Firelink's Shrine, down past New Londo ruins, without overshooting the jump of course. Use the Master Key, enter Valley of the Drakes, get caught on one of their tails, and die in one hit. Yeah, despite the fact you only have to be here for about 30 seconds, this area screwed me over more than a few times. Mainly because while I could avoid the Drake's attacks pretty consistently, they do so much damage that if they did hit me, it was almost guaranteed to one-shot. Although, like I said, this area is over pretty quickly and you can soon be up in Darkroot Basin trying to get the Black Knight Halberd. Well, at least hoping you get the Black Knight Halberd. I should also add the drop rate wasn't the only difficulty because the knight gave me far more trouble than he realistically should have. All you're supposed to do is go behind him and backstab him off the cliff, yet somehow I managed to fuck this up an embarrassing amount of times. Although with some persistence I managed to get good enough to consistently beat him, and with the weapon hopefully acquired, I made my way to the Undead Parish in hopes of continuing the speedrun, and ran into my first real problem. See, at this point you're supposed to do Sen'S skip, in which you parry one of the nearby hollows next to a specific pillar, triggering a glitch which lets you enter Sen'S fortress while the gate is still closed. However, while this glitch does indeed let you enter Sen'S fortress early, it also makes your movement go fucking haywire, and you have to do most of it blind. And no matter how much practice I got, I could not do this glitch consistently, and even when I did manage it, it was taking me 10 plus minutes, which in a speedrun obviously isn't ideal. I was actually struggling so much I considered scrapping the video, but then I realised I was being a massive idiot and I could just open Sen'S Fortress the same way every other player does, as both Bells of Awakening are still required to complete this run. So instead of going to the Undead Parish after killing the knight, I take the elevator back down, backtrack through Valley of the Drakes and make my way into Blighttown to fight Quelaag, where I immediately ran into another issue, that being my painfully low amount of health. Okay, so I should clarify that not only is this run normally done with early game HP, but it also relies heavily on the damage buff from the red Tearstone ring, which if you didn't know, only activates when you're on a sliver of health. So not only do you have to do the entire run basically one hit from death, but you have to do most bosses literally one hit from death, and doing hitless boss fights on top of speedrunning an already tough game, it just wasn't gonna happen. As such, I had to find a way to make sure that 1, I could kill the bosses quick enough, and 2, had enough health to sponge the occasional hit from late game enemies and bosses. Now thankfully this was a pretty easy fix since I found a soul dupe glitch that lets you use a soul for every arrow in your inventory. So at the start of every run, I'd head up to the undead merchant, making sure not to die to the hollows on the stairs, buy as many arrows as I could, pick up the souls in the Valley of the Drakes, and become level 114 before even reaching the Knight. A decision which pretty much saved my ass throughout this entire run. Naturally after this, Quelaag wasn't too much trouble, and after ringing the first bell of awakening, it was time to homeward bone back to Darkroot Basin, make my way up to the Undead Parish, buy the Crest of Artorias for later, and go to fight the Gargoyles. A fight which is by far the hardest of this entire run. No, I'm just joking. They are complete pushovers and you can literally one-shot the second one. Honestly, getting to this fight is actually harder than the fight itself, since the hollow gank squad before them can really fuck you up if you aren't careful. But apart from that, no trouble at all. After this, I rang the second bell of awakening, the gates to Sen'S fortress opened, and I was free to walk inside. Now, those who have played this game will know all too well the horror of Sen'S fortress. However, if you haven't, it's a giant building filled with traps, man-serpents who hit like a truck, and incredibly narrow beams accompanied by pendulums that are just begging to knock you to your death. So naturally, I was pretty nervous. However, as it turns out, I really didn't need to be, as this area turned out to be one of the least troublesome parts of the entire run. Mainly because after I had the pendulum timings down, I realised that as long as you keep moving, everything else in Sen'S fortress can be avoided very, very easily. And after that, I never really struggled with it. So yeah, after this I grabbed a safety bonfire and it was time to fight the Iron Golem. Now unlike the fortress itself, this boss can actually be a bit troublesome. Not because of the actual fight, but because you have to do battle with the true, undefeatable enemy of Dark Souls, gravity. See, due to the fact you don't have time to kill a boulder throwing giant, you're forced to fight on a far more narrow section of the arena. So naturally, you spend far more time worrying about falling, whether it be because of the boss or you just do it on your own. Oh, and yes, I am aware you can make him fall off the edge, but for some reason I just couldn't pull this off consistently enough. And apart from a few very stupid deaths on my part, it really wasn't that bad. Following this, you activate the Ring of Light and it's off to Anor Londo. Now, this area can be tough at the best of times, but between the gargoyles, rafters, bat demons, archers, and brutally long runbacks, it's a veritable minefield of potentially run-ruining deaths. And while all of them can be a pain in the arse, I think the title of most stressful has to go to the rafters, because fucking tightrope walking while dealing with unpredictable knife-throwing enemies is simply awful. Even more awful than the infamous Anor Londo archers, which surprisingly didn't give me as much trouble as I thought they would. Also, an honourable mention to the bat demons that let you get 99% of your way down a platform making you think you're safe, then pelting you with spears. Anyway, after finally getting past everything without dying, I grabbed a bonfire, duped a soul I found nearby, and it was time to deal with probably the most nerve-wracking boss so far, Ornstein and Smo. So I ran down the stairs, avoided the giant knight, entered the fog gate preparing to get my ass handed to me over and over, and didn't die once. Seriously, I didn't die a single time in any of my runs. I died more to the fucking stairs in Firelink's Shrine. Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure being level 180 had something to do with that, and I never would have been able to beat them with early game HP, but even so, everything I thought was going to be really hard wasn't, and everything I thought was going to be easy was a complete nightmare. Anyway, after I tried and failed multiple times to hit Guinevere with a black firebomb, I got the ability to warp, made my way to Duke's Archives to get the pendant needed for the DLC, only to be met with a golden fog gate reminding me that I hadn't placed the Lord Vessel. So I then placed the Lord Vessel, went back, killed the enemy that drops the pendant, and it didn't drop because I'd forgotten to kill Dusk. Brilliant. Just fucking brilliant. Then, after finally working out the order I had to do things in, I went back to the Undead Parish, used the Crest of Artorias, and went down to deal with the Hydra, the Golden Golem, and Dusk. Now, in general, this area isn't that bad, with the only issues being getting lost and the painfully long amount of time it can take to kill the Hydra. Since no matter how much I tried to predict it, the heads would always land just out of reach and I'd have to wait until it started another attack. Although once it is dead, the rest is pretty straightforward. Kill the Golden Golem, kill Dusk, then travel to Duke's Archives to get the pendant. An area which really isn't much fun. Mainly because anyone who's played this will know just how much damage these crystal bastards do, and despite the fact you only need to be here for 30 seconds, it's very, very easy to get killed. And the best tactic I found for this area was to take out the two closest enemies one by one, then make a mad dash for the golem and just hope I didn't get hit, since even if I did die, I'd normally kill it fast enough to get the pendant. Then it was back through Darkroot Basin, down the ladder and into the portal which takes you to the DLC, where you'll immediately be met by the Sanctuary Guardian, a boss which caused me more trouble than any other in this run, bar one. I found this fight to be incredibly inconsistent, in that sometimes he'd do his nice punishable attacks and I'd take him out no problem, and sometimes he'd be a bastard, spend 90% of his time in the air shooting lightning at me, and I'd die 3 times in a row. Now thankfully this fight does have one of the shortest runbacks in the game, but even so, this thing kicked my ass more times than I care to admit. Following this, it was through the Royal Woods, and it was time to deal with Artorias, a boss who's not that bad in general, but can become very scary very fast. See, at some point in the fight, Artorias will buff, and if you don't stop it, well, let's just say even my massive amounts of health couldn't save me. Yeah, the amount of damage he does when buffed is offensively high, and it's key you do not let him do it, because if he does, then the fight becomes a lot more tense. Although apart from that, he's fairly easy to read, and as long as you aren't too greedy, he's really not that bad. However, it's worth mentioning that while this victory is fairly easy, it's immediately followed up by the most difficult part of the run, the fight with Gwyn. This is the final part of the speedrun, which on its own makes it stressful, however for several key reasons, this is made so much worse. First up is the fact you don't have any of the Lord Souls needed to open the kiln, meaning you have to do a glitch that can take multiple attempts to get right and can be very time consuming. On top of that, you have the massive boss run, and then of course Gwyn himself. Oh, and because you used a glitch to get here, if you die, you have to do all of that all over again. It's also worth mentioning I had the added trouble of never learning how to parry Gwyn, and since Gwyn without parrying is a fucking monster, that made learning it priority number 1. Now my early attempts, they went well. However, after a lot of perseverance, the parry timings finally clicked, and I was getting good enough to consistently beat him. So, after getting to grips with everything I needed to do, I started a speedrun, it was all going well, I managed the glitch pretty quickly, crossed the fog gate for the final confrontation with Gwyn, and immediately died. Yeah, the issue, apart from my lack of skill, is that Gwyn has almost non-existent healing windows, so even though I knew how to parry, any mistake would often result in my death. However, after a bit more practice, I was able to beat Gwyn and finally complete a run, achieving a time of 1 hour and 8 minutes, which quite frankly was much better than I expected. So now, the goal was to get a run I could upload to speedrun.com. Now thankfully this opportunity came sooner rather than later, and I was making pretty good time, to the point where I was going to do it in around an hour, maybe less. Was, of course, being the operative word, because Gwyn decided that wasn't going to happen, and I died, ending with a time of 1 hour, 5 minutes and 24 seconds, a time that literally got me second last on the speedrun list, and literally last in the PC category. Although since that time could have been a lot faster, I kept trying to improve it, and after even more failed attempts, I got lucky, the Halberd dropped, and after using all my skill and effort, I finally did it. 1 hour and 31 seconds, but you know what? I'll fucking take it. Is it going to get me any records? No. And did it only get me marginally higher on the list? Yes. But it's close enough, especially considering how much of a pain in the arse it can actually be to get a run. And for a very first speedrun, I'd say I'm pretty happy with it. So that was the video. I know it's pretty different from what I normally do, but I felt like doing something, well, different by playing a game I don't despise. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.